Hey everyone, welcome back to the Transection podcast. And in this episode, we interview. That sounds dodgy, doesn't it? Interview. My mind, honestly, gutter. Anyway, we interview Stephanie Wiggins. Stephanie is Canadian and non-binary and a sex educator. And it's been, I don't know about you, but it's been quite a long time since I attended sex education as a child, and I was both thrilled and slightly uncomfortable at how much sex education has changed to now. I mean, I'm reassured, it's great, and I think it's really healthy. The way that Stephanie explains these things is very down to earth, very matter of fact, and actually I recognise my own shame about bodies and things like that I must have a little bit, because Stephanie was using biologically correct words to describe these different situations, and especially like teaching children about their own bodies and what it's actually called and things like that. And as Stephanie was describing these things and what we might say to young children in an age-appropriate way, I noticed myself recoil a bit, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I hope that this new approach and this sort of intersectional, inclusive, very broad and thorough approach to sex education throughout the ages of young people, I really have faith that this kind of thing will really change lives and help people to be happier, to be more empowered with their bodies, and to be more educated about consent and relationships, and what healthy versions of those things look like. Because, you know, consent was not a conversation that I'd even borne witness to until I was in my 20s, which is far too late in my experience. It caused a lot of issues that I've covered in past podcasts. So yeah, I feel very positive about this conversation, but I warn you, if you're squeamish and you've got your own kind of shame about bodies and things, you may have a moment when you're like, wow, this is a lot. So brace yourself. But it's very, very good. I think the way that Stephanie explains these things is fascinating and so important as well, like really, really important. And I think that it's so important that for many of us adults, we're hearing these things for the first time, because it's better late than never. And I think that with more information and arming ourselves with these things, it can really make us realise some things that we might not have done before. And I think that's really powerful. So I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't signed up to our mailing list yet, go to mxharrishill.com/transection. There's a green box, you put your name and your email in there, and then that's it. And we'll send you one email a week to let you know about podcast releases and also anything else that we're doing. I put everything in just the one email a week, so it's sort of in a newsletter kind of form, so we're not spamming you all the time. But it's good. There's other things in there that we don't talk about so much, including if you haven't got yours yet and you haven't heard about it yet, there is a Trans Plus Gender Identity, a guide for beginners, which is a free 10-page PDF. The first page is my face, so it's not too much to read if you're not into that. It's very digestible. That was the idea. It's free. You can go and get your own copy. You can take it into work, or it'll help you to learn about trans identities and non-binary identities and things like that. So you can better understand yourself, or maybe you're supporting somebody, like maybe there's a kid in your family, or excuse me, hiccups, or maybe for work or for clients or whatever. Maybe you're a medical person or a therapist. So go and get your free copy. There's a masterclass that runs for an hour. You can watch it at your leisure whenever you like, and it takes you through the booklet. The idea is that these two things the book and the masterclass will always be free for those who really need that information and want to understand more, maybe need a bit of help, and it's there. So yeah, I think it will be cool. The more and more people that sort of understand different identities and realities and things like that, I think the deeper connections we can have with people, and it won't feel so awkward. Because when you don't know something and you're scared of putting your foot in it, it's kind of awkward and a bit of a killjoy, if you ask me. And I think we'd be better off if we've got a bit of a grounding in these things, then we could have a bit more confidence about talking to people and making friends and all of those nice things that, of course, I think we all want more of, really. So it's there. Anyway, enjoy this episode, and I'll see you on the other side. Hi, Stephanie, and welcome to the Transection podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm looking forward to it. I'm recording today from my friend's flat in Hemel Hempstead, Hertfordshire in the UK. And Steph, whereabouts are you from?
I'm here in British Columbia, Canada.
Cool.
So we're quite a few hours apart.
Yeah.
You're in the future, I think.
Yes, I'm 8 hours in the future, so I can let you know about some things that are coming your way. You've got 8 hours to prepare, so
I
that's good.
appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. I also have a lot of friends in Australia, so they can tell me and I can tell you, and then that's like 16 hours ahead for you.
Whoa. Maybe I'll win the lottery.
I was just thinking that. I don't know why this isn't a thing, why people don't do this more often.
I don't know.
It's just silly. So Steph, tell us what you do for your job.
Yeah, so I'm a sexual health consent like 2S LGBTQ educator. And so I go into classrooms and teach about body science and sex ed to kids. I'm working on workshops for parents about consent and about how human development works and how we, with that knowledge, we can be better parents and better adults in children's lives. Yeah, I've got a lot of things that I can do, and for the last 12 years I've also been an early childhood educator, which means that I work with children from 0 to 5. That's something that I'm leaving the field. I'm not going to be doing that anymore, but it's definitely going to inform the sex ed that I do, especially with young children and families.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So I know that a lot of people who are conservative or maybe not very aware might panic at the idea of young children having sex education. But I mean, you're not teaching 5-year-olds what a blowjob is, right?
No, definitely not. Yeah.
So just explain a little bit about how your stuff is age appropriate and what we're wanting children to learn when they're so young.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's like, in a succinct way, we've all been raised to believe that like talking about sex is this event. It's like a one-time thing and it's super uncomfortable and nobody's enjoying it and it's kind of traumatic and everything. And really good sex ed is layered. And so when I go into a classroom of kindergartners, for example, or if I'm teaching parents about how to teach consent from birth or how to be an askable adult in their children's lives, it looks like starting from the very foundational information of like of science, like anatomically correct words. So we're not using euphemisms or cutesy words for body parts, and we're working hard to not bring shame into those moments. And so, you know, very confidently saying vulva and penis and scrotum and anus, and not saying, you know, like, you know, I'm going to wipe your bum, or I'm going to, you know, change your diaper, and I'm going to, I don't know, you know,
Yeah.
all those things that we say, like cutesy words that don't protect our kids, and they do us all a disservice, and they seed that shame early on.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess aside from the shame as well, like we need to all have a shared language around that this part of life, because if a child, and particularly unfortunately if a child's like in danger or in a compromised situation, that you want them to be able to tell you what's happened, and you need to kind of guarantee that we're going to understand what that child is telling us.
Yeah, exactly. It's really the biggest preventative measure against childhood abuse is clear anatomical words that are being used, like you're saying, so that there's a shared language. And by doing that, it also shows our kids that we are safe people to come and talk to, and that they're not going to get in trouble, and that we're going to listen to them and believe them. And these are all things that stem from the issues of being afraid to talk about bodies in a nonchalant way, really, in a way that doesn't seem scary or gross or full of judgment. And yeah, so, you know, if kids have that, then they're going to come to you and feel safe to tell you, like, I felt weird and this happened, or, you know, this situation happened, and here's where I was touched on my body, or whatever. And if those words aren't clear, then that kid could be going over and over again to different adults. And if they don't share that language, then that adult isn't going to understand, and they're probably going to end up being ignored. And yeah, and then that abuse can continue.
Yeah, that's good. I think I mentioned to you the other day when we sort of had our sort of hello and get to know you meeting, that there's a lot of conversation around consent going on, and how we're helping our children to understand consent, and the language that we're using, and the rules that we're explaining to children about their own autonomy and consent and what's appropriate. And I said this to you before, but I'd seen something on Facebook where someone had kind of couldn't quite believe that this topic, that like they couldn't make the connection between consent in a very sort of non-sexual way from early on being ignored, and how that could possibly lead to problems as the children get older. So I mean, I know what I think, but I'm curious to know from your perspective, from your professional perspective, like how you might broach that subject with somebody that they've said, like, you know, tickling kids even after they've asked you to stop, because that happened to me a lot as a child, particularly male members of my family. They just thought it was funny, and I do feel very strongly, and from the people that I've spoke to have been in similar situations, that really did affect my sense of belonging to myself versus other people having entitlement to do what they wanted, and just to accept that I wasn't going to be listened to. So I mean, how would you kind of explain that to somebody who is ignorant and can't quite make that connection between early sort of non-sexual consent to problems like sort of growing up?
Right. Yeah. So I think that I would try and frame it from a place of disempowerment, and how if we don't if we don't hear children's no's and stops, and that we just continue doing whatever it is that we want to do, like if we use tickling as an example, which I think is actually a wonderful way to teach consent to kids. You know, if we don't listen to a child stop and no in a tickling situation when they're very young, the idea of an adult being allowed to do whatever they want to that child's body, and that their feelings and their no is not respected, that it creates this foundational idea that my body doesn't belong to me, and that my voice doesn't matter and my opinion doesn't matter. And on the flip side of that, having a kid who has foundational knowledge of knowing that when I say stop, my feelings will be heard, and this adult or whomever will stop when I say stop, that means that that kid, that's their expectation of everybody. And so going into the world as they grow up, when there is a violation or there is consent being breached, that will be an abnormal situation for that child. And so they will see it for what it is, instead of, like many of us, having this almost being like gaslighting ourselves in our brains and saying, oh, well, they didn't really mean that, or, you know, or they're just having fun, or maybe I really do want this. And instead of being sure of ourselves and having deep respect for ourselves, that instead we would make excuses for that person's behavior, maybe feel like hitting that person or screaming or doing whatever it is that you need to do to get out of that situation, that's like too much, you're being too much, you're being unreasonable, all these kinds of things that I think that we tell kids, and especially children who are being raised in a feminine framework, to be quiet, to not make a fuss, to just smile and bear it. And that it does definitely set a child up for being more likely to being abused. And I think that part of that also goes back to being an askable adult. And if you are the parent and you are constantly breaching your child's consent, they are going to know that you are an adult that may make excuses for other adults. Like, if they have a gray and blurry idea of what consent even is, because you've never taught them clear consent, the likelihood that they're going to go to you in the first place is low, because that is not there's no clear boundaries of what consent is and what the expectations of others should be. And also that if you just keep on telling them that their feelings don't matter by your actions and by your words, then why would they want to come to you in the first place? Like, kids are smart, they're freaking brilliant. Before like the age of 5, we are making more neural pathways in our brain and learning more than we do for the rest of our lives. And so it's like, kids are actually geniuses. That's how our bodies as humans are set up to be. And we are constantly teaching children through our actions, through our relationships with others around them, and the way that we model how to be in relationship, how to ask for consent, how to give consent, how to negotiate, like they pick all of that up. They are sponges. And yeah, it's really, really important. And I can understand why people get triggered by the word rape, right? Even people who I would call like rape apologists, right? Where they're like, you're being sensationalist about this. And it's like, it's not sensationalist, because we're talking about foundational development of a human and how they believe the world to be, because we only have our own perception and our own life to kind of look at other things. And that's why a lot of us who do have abuse in our lives, it may take well into our teenagehood or our adulthood for somebody else, or to go to college or something, and to find out that like actually the family dynamic that you grew up having is not normal, and that you were abused. And that's because we think that what's happening to us is normal, because we have nothing else to compare it to.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think for me, a lot of these conversations I can clearly identify from my own experience, but I think as well, I've met a lot of people, and I think even in just what I do and the way that I am, I have deep conversations with people all the time. And I think being an introvert, those are my favorite ones. If someone's asking me like, what's the weather like, or what are you having for dinner, I just die a bit inside. So small talk's not my forte. And in talking to people deeply so often, and a lot of the time it can be strangers, and certainly many of the people that I know offline, or have an existing relationship with, we speak about things like this all the time. And people will often say like, I was brought up in this way and it affected me in this way. So it boggles my mind sometimes that these conversations around consent could be considered anything other than completely logical. And I do think things are getting better. Like I've got lots. I mean, I'm in my early 30s now, so I've got a lot of friends who are parents now, and they often talk about the no pants rule and things like that. I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I understand that it's about.
I don't know if I'm familiar with the no pants.
I don't know how they describe it, but they refer to it so often, and I think, oh, I'm so glad that like the parents of my generation, who are now having children of their own, are familiar with that, and they're like, oh yeah, that's a really important thing to say. Whereas if I've been in the company of people possibly who aren't parents yet, or maybe they're sort of quite a bit older, maybe like my parents' age, I think they just don't, they often are of a generation where they were told to kind of shut up and get on with it. And so when we're having these conversations, they're like, oh, why is that important? Can't we just get on with things the way they are? And I have to remember, I can't just be like, listen, man, I'm really traumatized.
Totally.
You can't say that, because people, especially the people who, like you were saying, like an adult that's safe to ask. I still find myself in that role a little bit sometimes when I hear an older adult saying, like, why on earth is this important? And I already know that because they've said that, they're so unaware that they become to me an older adult that I can't talk to.
Totally, yeah.
And I also think, like, if you don't have kids anymore and you're not parenting, or maybe you don't have kids at all, and your world is maybe very much like work, and then the friends at your age, like, I guess these conversations don't come up very much, and what they see is possibly like sensationalist press and articles and things.
Yeah, I feel like for those people, like I can't believe this is even a debate anymore, but I have had debates or discussions or whatever with friends even that are not parents and stuff about like, why is spanking bad? Like, you know, I was spanked, I'm fine, blah blah blah. And just like, I think one of the things that I just keep going back to, and I would go back to with some of these people that you're mentioning too, is it's like, listen, like, we have had 30 years of like of studies in psychology and brain development. We've had all of these new technologies come out where we can like look at the brain and how it works, and we have a way more broad and deep understanding of human development. And we know from these 30 years that what we were doing 30 years ago was harmful to people who were being spanked, or harmful to people who were you know, like sent to their room or not given food, or like whatever these things that were the norm for parenting 30 years ago. It's bullshit. If you think that we should still be using what we were doing 30 years ago, like, do you believe in science, like, at all? Because we have 30 years worth of new science, you know. So for me, it kind of just goes back to like, I get it, but at the same time, you either believe in science or you don't. And if you don't believe in science, then I'm not probably going to waste my breath either, because we're not going to agree on a lot of things.
It's really interesting because you say like you just believe in science or you don't. However, you know, there's lots of science behind like emotional well-being, including like trans and non-binary identities, and sort of how, in what conditions we thrive and in what conditions we're suffering and things like that,
Right.
that have been studied. And so often, and again, like I'm coming across lots of people who really cling on to kind of this idea of science being very black and white and being very helping life to kind of be predictable or controlled.
Mm-hmm.
And so often I find the people who kind of cling to science almost as their sort of kind of security blanket will often then not be on board with all of the studies that support the more kind of like what we call like the sort of soft skills, or the social side of things, the psychological side of things. And I some yeah I would like to think that science will eventually kind of back up what we're all kind of saying anyway, with either within our sort of minority communities or just from a place of emotional intelligence or emotional awareness. But I don't know about you, but I sometimes get kind of fed up when things get brought back to science, because that science isn't there to get me out of bed in the morning. You know, like I do that. I have to feel a certain way about my day in order to want to get up and do it. That science isn't there really, like when I'm interacting with my family or my friends. And like, I really like science. If it wasn't for science, I'd be dead like so many times already.
Right. Yeah, me too.
So you know, I really believe in it, but sometimes I wonder if science is put ahead of the real sort of human price of these things, like how, you know, how, and sometimes I think if people are already biased against kind of like things like psychological wellness and affirming people's identity and experiences and people being heard and understood and belonging and all that kind of thing, I wonder if they're not even going to get it if we say, listen, there are studies. Like, first of all, they don't believe in science, they just use it for their own sense of security and predictability, which of course the universe doesn't do predictability. And also I sometimes wonder if we're not, that they're not going to be reached anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, sometimes I think it has a lot to do with what the topic is too. Like, I think talking about why we don't spank is a great topic to point back to science, because there's good science that's supporting that. But I definitely agree, like when it comes to binary issues, the science is behind. There's a lot of conflicting things happening in the science community, I think, around trans studies and queer sex ed. Are you familiar with their podcast? Oh my
No.
goodness. Oh my goodness, you should listen to Queer Sex Ed. These two, they like really deep dive into like the history of trans medicalism and stuff. And so they talk about all of that, and it's like the science is there, but then people want to refute the science, and that's fine and understandable, I guess. I also think that when it comes to people trying to debate people's identities, that the only way that actually gets broken down is by having relationships with trans and non-binary people, right? And that's it humanizes these ideas that they have been holding, and they realize that like trans and non-binary people are people, and that like we wash our dishes and make food, and it's like not this weird, I don't know, I'm not really quite sure what people think, but like they have these weird ideas, and I think it just humanizes all of us. But then there's some topics that you can't really humanize, right? Like how do you humanize spanking, or how do you humanize rape culture? Like I guess you could have people come and talk about their experiences, and in that way you could form relationship between somebody who is skeptical and the person who has experience, but that's more challenging, I think, than being able to give studies and everything. But you're right. Like, I mean, if there are going back to studies, there's studies that talks about like if a person isn't on the fence about a topic and they're like firmly in the no camp, it doesn't matter what kind of information you give them, they're just going to dig their heels in harder. And that if the only people that are open to being swayed, if you will, are the people that are already on the fence about the topic. They're open to it. So
yeah, I agree with that. And I think people often say things about science, and I'm like, humans created science, right? So far, as far as we know, no other science exists in the universe. We've done it for our own I mean, in part for our own entertainment, but a lot of it because we want to be creative. We want to make things and fly and talk to each other on Zoom calls, and it's all kind of for our own benefit and our own gain. And I think that's often my bottom line, that if science isn't sort of making things better, then it's kind of an abuse of something, just like anything else. And ultimately I do, science is meant to be impartial, but science is most of the time only ever carried out, thought about, hypothesized about by humans. So I'm like, it doesn't matter how unbiased you think you could be, you're still a human doing science, and come up with an idea, and you want to see if that works, or if you can reproduce your results repeatedly and things like that. And I'm like, it's still flawed. It's still not going to answer every single question that we have. And also, studies in science takes so much time. We don't have sort of 2 or 3 years to wait on some big project that's going to potentially, for instance, support like a minority group. In that time, they're going to suffer and people are going to die. Well, that was really morbid, wasn't it? But Yeah, and I don't know. I think science is great. I think that it's become often where people are kind of leaving their hats, or kind of they're making it their home, and I think it avoids a lot of vulnerability. And I think that a lot of what I talk about and a lot of what you talk about requires a kind of vulnerability to answer issues now.
Mm-hmm.
And also those studies are fine, but it needs people like you to go into schools and actually apply that science and
Mm-hmm.
talk to people about the real effects. Like, the science can exist, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, anyway, that was a bit of a tangent.
It's good. It's
Good.
good.
So so apart from work, what's it like being non-binary in Canada for you?
Oh, well, I live in a lovely little bubble of a town, and um, we have a group that does, they're called anchors, and they are specifically for folks that live with HIV and AIDS. But it's this really cool community group that does a lot of education. We have like a, um, a safe injection site and a bunch of things, but they also do sex ed in the schools to an extent. And a friend of mine, Milo, they are our trans go-to person for trans health and counseling and stuff like that in town. And so we are a hub, I think, kind of like a rural go-to place for a lot of trans folks, because we have really amazing support. We have a really amazing doctor in town who's like does all the trans care. And so I think that I'm like super privileged where I live. I'm not super out as non-binary. It's something that's new for me. I've only really given myself permission to kind of look at my gender identity in the last 2 years. And it's something that I've been very upfront about in the last year. But so it's like it's hard to kind of speak for it. And I think that non-binary is such a huge variation, right? Like it's one of our umbrella terms for so many things. And I always get clocked as female, which is fine. There are some traits that I really, feminine traits that I really like love. Like I'm still a mom, even though I'm non-binary. And but yeah, I think that like I live in a fairly safe community. I think it varies from place to place. Like BC, I think is bigger than probably the whole of the UK. And so like, going up north to in northern BC, I know that there's a lot more struggles for the queer community up there. And then, if I go west and go to Vancouver, I'm jealous of how much awesomeness that's going on, but that's because it's a very large city. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I just answered your question or not, but
No,
yeah.
it's good. It's good. You gave a less good example and a more good example. So yeah, I thought you
Yeah.
framed it very well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I live at the moment. I'm living with my parents, and they live on a road between a large village and a tiny village, and then we've got 15 minutes either direction, like major towns.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of more conservative supporters, um, definitely around where I live. Although plenty of liberals as well. It's probably sort of evenly balanced. Although the village that I technically actually live in is very white, very middle class.
Mm-hmm.
There are some sort of council housing, but a lot of that's been bought up by the tenants, so it's become private housing again, and
Mm.
it's Yeah, I mean, I'm mixed. I'm Indian and white, but because I'm so pale, I think I'm just red as white anyway.
Mhm.
But I mean, I'm over 6 feet tall and often have like mad hair and wear like sort of piratey looking clothes. So I'm already, and you know, I get read as female a lot of the time. So um, yeah, I mean, it's not too bad. It's not too
Mhm.
bad, but it's definitely yeah, I miss the variety and the diversity of people, and especially like a queer community. I'm actually thinking of setting up my own thing, although because we're possibly heading for lockdown too, so I mean that's not going to happen in person anytime soon.
Yeah, that makes it challenging.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, a couple of years ago, the doctor of neuroscience that I mentioned to you that I dated, most of
Right.
their friends were queer. Like there's
Mhm.
a gay guy and a bunch of trans women, and it was lovely, and we would like we hung out a few times, and it was just the first time in my life that I've been in like a kind of queer trans only bubble.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, where I need some more of that, please.
Yeah, I mean, it feels so safe and easy, when you're with that kind of family. I
Mm,
feel that for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, I get little glimpses of that when we have Pride, or when I put on an event or something for Pride in town, and yeah, just looking around and being like, everybody's queer. This is amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, it feels
yeah, it's
uh,
lovely.
really, really special.
Have you seen The Social Dilemma yet on Netflix?
I've been trying to watch it, so no, I haven't yet.
Okay.
What do you want to say about it?
Well, the upshot of it, or the takeaways that I have from it, firstly, is that the algorithm to keep engagement up encourages division and opposites and arguments, basically. And they'll show,
Oh.
yeah. So, I mean, firstly, I kind of knew that already because, I mean, yeah, it's you know, you look at how you interact with people in normal life, and then you go on Facebook and you maybe are having a conversation in a public space or even on your own page, or your own profile with people who possibly don't know you very well, so maybe they've read something a certain way, um, and I just, you know, I'm on social media and I always think to myself, I've never had this many arguments in offline in my life, so it's got to be partly to do with
Totally.
an online platform. And the other take, and to the point that apparently there was Facebook has been used a lot to really negatively influence a lot of political situations, because I mean it's and I think I can't remember the details. I don't have a great head for details, but there was one point where it was thought to have incited some really serious political issues. I think it was a vote or something. Ultimately, it was actually quite worrying. And
Mm.
since that's come out, lots of on that they've got a lot of like ex-employees of the larger platforms
Right.
who have said like the number of things that they've seen go on behind closed doors and a number
Mhm.
of things that they've been personally responsible for, like that's why they've left, because they've realized like how unmoderated it is and how easy it is to kind of corrupt platforms like that.
Mm.
Um, and they were saying that, yeah, like basically every interaction, and it can even detect when you're emotionally like unstable, if you're depressed, things like that. It also learns like if you pause and look at a picture, even if you don't interact with it, it will still recognize that you were interested enough to see.
Oh, whoa. Yeah, you paused long enough to actually really look at it and stuff. Wow.
Yeah, so it's learning from you all the time. And because we, the users of the platforms, particularly Facebook, I think, this is
Hmm.
what the thing is said. I'm just paraphrasing what I've learned. Uh, is that basically the users, the people who are not actually paying any money to Facebook, we are the product. That's the idea. And basically, their real customers are the people who are paying them money to advertise, and therefore they want to keep you like glued in for longer. So you'll get notifications apparently of certain things pop up if that they know will get a good response from you, even if it's a negative one, if you haven't looked for a certain amount of time. Like it will learn the things that will like hook you back in and keep you using it for hours longer than you maybe would do already, so on and so forth. And one of my friends said to me recently, she said, you have to watch this, like you spend a lot of time online and you really need to watch this and learn about how you're spending your time and how it could actually be affecting you and you're not aware. And she kind of alluded to the fact that, well, to her opinion or her take was that I spent too much time on social media. Now that's probably true to a point, but I was also thinking about it. So you know, I like to kind of reevaluate things and try not to get too annoyed about people having opinions that I didn't necessarily ask for. But I thought about it. I thought if I didn't have these platforms and wasn't passionate about spreading sort of education and encouraging people to get on and understand each other, what would my life be like? And I thought to myself, like, I just don't have those connections to my community offline in real life. And pandemic aside, like I don't even know what that would look like. I'm not related to anyone that I know of, or there's nobody. I don't think I've ever come across an obviously trans person in my village, which has got like, I think the last time I looked it was several thousand people. I can't remember. It was under 20,000, maybe it was, I don't know. I'll find out later, it doesn't matter. But yeah, like I have no idea how close I am to any of those people. And I think like if you're a different ethnicity, unless you've been adopted or something, or you don't have any family left, then most of the time you're related to somebody from your minority. But being queer or trans, you're possibly the only one in your circle at some point.
Yes.
And I was thinking a lot about how we are developing this language in our sort of trans plus community across many different countries. I mean, that's how you and I connected, was on Facebook. And I think a lot about this. And I said to my friend earlier, whose house I'm at, I was like, do you think I'm part of a cult? And I was really questioning it, and I was like, this is mad. And he was like, well, aren't we all part, we're all part of something. And those of us who are in whatever kind of membership it is, you know, we understand the ways that we speak and the things that we collectively might believe. And so I was just asking this question, you know, in my mind of like how our community is kind of supporting each other and how we're forming and how we're finding community, but it's on platforms, multiple platforms that have questionable ethics. But yet without it, we would find it much more difficult to affect change.
Yeah.
And also to find community and just a little safe haven if we're living in very kind of cis het environments and stuff.
Totally. Yeah, I think that the community at large, like the queer community, that there's a lot of us who feel isolated, and that then the subset of the trans plus community, like even more so. And yeah, like I am blessed. I do have a handful of non-binary and trans friends, and I have a partner who's a trans woman. And but the truth is that like online I have a greater variety. I get to be a support system for people, being on social media during COVID has been really interesting, and seeing how COVID has affected people, especially like trans folks, in like a positive way and in a negative way. Even just with mask wearing, you can think of this one really wonderful trans person on one of the groups that I'm on, and they've been able to like dress in a gender affirming way and go out during the pandemic because their mask hides features that make them feel dysphoric and make them be misgendered. And it's beautiful because every time that they post as themselves, they have like hundreds of folks who are like, you look so beautiful, it's so cool to watch you like growing, and it's like, I don't know, it's very special. And I'm looking forward to watching The Social Dilemma. A long time ago I realized that I was being taken advantage of by like Google and all these things, and I made a conscious choice to be like, for me, as far as I can see at this point, maybe I'll feel differently after I watch this, but that the benefits outweigh the possible negative things that could happen from being on Facebook, from being a part of Instagram, from having whatever, like 7 Gmail emails or whatever it is. And because I think that one of the things I've learned in my life is that taking care of myself is the only way that I can take care of others and be a good parent and be a good employee and all these other kinds of things. And part of that is finding community and feeling like I belong.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the same for me as well. Yeah. So, Stephanie, if you wanted, if we've got parents listening who are new to this idea of consent, what do you think are some of the, like just a couple or a few like key takeaways that you would want them to get from listening to you speaking about consent?
Yeah. It's of course different for every age. So I'm just going to kind of start from the beginning. Like I was saying earlier, children are tiny geniuses right from the moment of birth. They are always listening. They are constantly learning. And so we need to do our very best to be modeling for our children how we expect other people to treat them, because they learn how they should be spoken to and how they should be treated and how to be respectful and treat others by how we act in front of our children and what we say in front of our children. On a similar vein, children start to develop language around anywhere between like about 12 months to 18 months is when we're starting to see like words and all of that. And I think a lot of us adults have this misinformed idea that children don't understand before they speak, that we should use like baby talk, like baby words and things like that to children because they're small and that they're, I don't know, that they're stupid and they don't understand. And that's not true. Children don't speak until that age only because of muscle development in their throat and their mouth and their tongue. If that development happened earlier on, your child would be speaking you know, within a couple of weeks of being born, because they're already processing all that information. So with that understanding in mind, talking in front of your child like they're not there is disrespectful. And it's another thing that we often do. And I think that it creates anxiety, it creates disempowerment in children, because how rude is it as an adult to have another adult be like, yeah, Stephanie, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, excuse me, I'm right here. Like, you can't talk to me about me like that. That's really rude. Yet we do this constantly to children, and it's something that we don't think about. And I think one of the last things that I would talk about with consent is that in addition to being fully cognizant and very sharp and understanding of what's going on, children's brains, when they are young, especially under 3, it takes them a lot longer for their brain to process what they've heard, and then to process it in their brain, and to understand what's about to happen. And so as an early childhood educator in my classrooms, my expectation of educators was that, especially for children who were pre-verbal, which meaning before they were able to speak, that we tell children what's going to happen to them before we do that thing. So whether that's giving a 5-minute warning before we change activities, you know, in 5 minutes we're gonna leave and get in the car to go to school, or in 5 minutes we're gonna clean up. That gives a child the ability to understand what's going to happen before it happens, because even as adults, like, you know, you're engaged in something and somebody's like, no, we have to leave right now, let's go, like, that's just, even thinking about that gives me anxiety, where
I
it's
would
like,
throw furniture if someone did that.
yeah. Yeah, right. And so, like, these sorts of things give children, like, help children understand that they are valued, what their work, which for children is play. Literally, play is their work. That is how they work through everything that they see, everything that happens to them, that is through their play. So, you know, valuing that work that children are doing by letting them know, we're not gonna, in 5 minutes, we're gonna stop playing and we're gonna have dinner, or whatever it might be. That we need to keep in mind that for under 3s, it can take 10 to 15 seconds to process information. So often I see parents trying and doing a great job of, you know, giving choices, or telling a child what's going to happen before it happens, and all sorts of things, but they don't give that child enough time to process what just happened. So if I was in a classroom with under 3s and I said, okay, tiny baby, I'm going to pick you up now and take you to the bathroom and change your diaper, or we're going to go change your diaper, I would wait 10 seconds at least. And that feels like an impossibly long time for an adult, but that allows that child to understand what you just said and then prepare themselves. And let me tell you, in our classroom, when we implemented this and we started telling kids, okay, here's this cloth that I have for you, you just finished eating, so I'm going to wipe your face, and you wait that 10 seconds, children will offer their face to you. They will offer their hands to you, because they've had this opportunity to A, be a part of what is about to happen, and B, be respected. You know, like, you're respecting the fact that their brain just processes slower than ours, and that you want them to be a part of this. I think that it's like this idea that it's funny or that it's just the way that things are, that when we wipe children's noses that they're gonna like have a tantrum and like lose it about it, and that, oh, that's just being a kid. And it's like, no, it's the fact that you just shove this napkin in their face and you're wiping their nose and they have no idea this is about to happen. You're touching their body without asking them. You know, like honestly, if somebody came up to me with a wet cloth and just like shoved it in my face and started wiping my face, I would be upset
I would
because
punch them right in the throat. I would not like it.
me too. Me too.
You're like,
And
what the fuck are you doing? You know, I was because you told me that 10 to 15-second rule when we first talked.
yes.
And since then I saw my niece who's 11 months old and she hates having her face touched.
Yeah.
And I sort of was discussing this with you're like, okay. Sorry, my friend's just coming. I'll just carry on. Yeah, so we were talking about this rule. So I thought, I was with my niece who's 11 months, and I thought, I wonder like if I could try this out and see what happens. And she at the moment loves mud and stones, and she's eating, like she's in the garden and she'll get a handful of mud and she'll be like, and like put it in her mouth and it will be stuck under her fingernails, all, and she just eats it and she's having a great time.
Yes.
And she's also taken to putting stones in her mouth as well. So obviously we're like, you know, so
Yes.
I didn't panic. Like I just put my hand in front of her mouth and I was like, can you spit that out, please? And she doesn't, she's got a few words. She's got like mum and dad and hi. She said hello to me the other day when I was singing the Teletubbies song to her. I went, say hello. And she went, hello. And I was like, oh my God. It's so freaky when someone tiny is talking to you.
Totally.
But anyway, I put my hand, I was trying what you said. I said, spit it out, please. And you could see her. She heard what I said. She was processing and then she did it. I didn't have to like put my fingers in her mouth or anything. She just did it. And I was like, oh, this is so much fun. And
Yeah.
and I'm starting to wonder because she hates having her nappy changed. But and you know, when I've done it, I'm like, we're going to change your nappy now, and I'll say it several times as like before I pick her up and then as we're walking over, and I'm like, we're just going to do this, it'll be quick, everything's fine. And she still kicks up a fuss about it. She doesn't like it. And so I'm sort of standing there questioning it. Does she just not like it because she loves free movement and she doesn't want to have to be static, and she just, you know, it's nothing to do with anything that we're doing? Or you know, maybe that dialogue, like maybe that hasn't happened enough, so now she's kind of automatically like, oh, I don't like this because of the thing. So maybe she's learned to not like it. So I've spoken to my therapist about that. I was like, what's the rule? And she said some kids, it doesn't matter what you do, they don't want to be there, they want to be playing and doing other things. So
It's
you're
totally
not necessarily like violating anybody's boundaries. It might just be that that's not what she wants to be doing right now. She'd be quite happy to sit in her own wet nappy for another hour.
I do have a couple of suggestions.
Yeah.
For that is, I don't know what like where she gets changed is and stuff, but like if you could make it accessible for her to get there, like with stairs or something, that can be a big piece, which is like the autonomy to get there and put themselves there is sometimes helpful.
Okay.
I don't know what kind of dialogue happens during diaper change and stuff, but like, you know, that going back to the sex ed piece, like that is the time to start practicing, you know, for your sister and everybody, like, you know, to start saying like, okay, there's a little bit of poop in your vulva, so I'm just gonna separate your labia and wipe this poop and stuff. And it's like, for some people it's like, you want me to say what? But like, how else is this child going to learn these things? That was my moment as a teen. Was I a teen? No, I think I was like I was like 13 or 14, and my aunt had twins and already had another child who was like under 2, and so she really needed people to come and support her when the babies were first born. And she's a registered nurse, and still very like Christian family. But I was flabbergasted because at that time in my life, nobody had ever talked to me about my body. I didn't know any of the words for my body because that's how I was raised. And I remember very vividly during a diaper change, being there with my aunt, and she heard the baby was doing what many babies do when the diaper comes off, and was like touching her naked body because it's always clothed and it feels nice, and etc etc. And so she's touching her own body, and my aunt is going, yeah, that's your vulva, and now you're touching your labia and all this stuff. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, what are you saying? Like, first of all, I didn't know those words myself, and second of all, I was like, why would anybody be saying this? And now, of course, because of who I am, I understand how incredibly important it is.
Because you're a what?
For
Show
so
us
many.
your t-shirt. Show us your t-shirt.
Oh,
You're a sex geek.
I'm a sex geek.
For those of you who aren't watching the video, Steph's wearing a red shirt that just says in big capital letters "sex geek." Especially for this recording.
Especially for this recording. It's my one of my favorite sex educators. It's his shirt, Reed Mahalko. If you don't know Reed, he's somebody to definitely read up on. Haha, read about Reed. But yeah, it's really important, and diaper changing is an opportunity we have to teach kids about normalizing bodies, normalizing using words, and like destigmatizing the idea of feeling pleasure in our body, because like even in utero there are instances of people touching their own bodies, their genitals and stuff, and that's just a very super normal part of being a human being, and that we shouldn't shame our kids for doing things that feel good. I think that that's a whole nother episode in and of itself, but I think that as adults, we often can't imagine masturbation not being sexualized. And what I mean by that is that, like, as adults, if we're masturbating, we're probably like thinking about a sexy person or a sexy like interaction or whatever. And there's like, it's sexual because we're thinking about others or we're thinking about a situation that is sexual, but kids are not doing that thinking of other people. Like, they haven't gotten to a point in their human development that they are sexual towards others. They're literally like, we are all pleasure seeking people. That's why we like to wrap ourselves up in blankets and drink our tea when it's cold outside and things like that. Like, that feels good to do. And it's the same for kids, right? Is like, they are touching themselves.
It's like a neurological, like, it's just a feedback thing, right? My nerves are doing this to my brain. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see how it's, I mean, I understand why it's different. It's because we've been raised in a shame society, but like, nobody shames a kid for like petting their face or twirling their hair or you know, like having a blanket and they like to touch it because it feels so soft. And it's like, it's honestly just like a sensory input thing. And for kids, like before the age of like probably 9, it's not sexual. It's just, honestly, it feels good to do this, so I do it. Just like chewing on something or picking my nose or whatever it is that kids do, and they love it. And but it's us adults who, like, I don't know, try and make it something that it's not, and put adult expectations on something that's just like, honestly, human behavior.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of boundaries do we teach kids about that? Because I'm close to several people who've been in early child care and stuff like that,
Mhm.
And they've described like telling the kids like that's okay to do, but we do it on our own.
Mhm.
You know, we can go to our bedroom and do that, or the bathroom, and that's fine. And
Mhm.
so I don't know, like, what's your take on that? Like, what boundaries do we introduce to kids around that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's like that's really it, is that you know, talking about the fact that like most people do this. Like I want to you know, create space for people who are asexual, right? Like some people may never masturbate, and that's totally fine and normal. And a lot of people do masturbate. And so like to be able to say, if you can, like, oh, this, you know, I do this too, and it feels really nice. But the thing that is that we have to do it by ourselves in our room. It's not something that we do in front of other people. And so like just to encourage that kid to understand the social norms, because it's the same thing, like not to draw it back, but back to nose picking, right? Like it's like, honestly, there's nothing wrong with picking your nose, and but we have this social stigma around it. And so it's like if you have if your butt is itchy, or like or you got to pick your nose or something, like it's not okay to just do that in the aisle at the grocery store when everybody's around or whatever. Like it grosses people out, and it's because of our social expectations of one another. And I know that, and masturbation is like, I think is different because it is sexualized and because it has to do with genitals. um but in a social idea, like we learn those social cues. And so we have to teach kids the social cues too. And if we can just normalize it by saying, you know, lots of people do this, or most people do this, and like I bet it feels really good, and it's something that we do in our rooms with the door closed, or in the bathroom with the door closed, and just like really driving it home that this is a thing that we're not supposed to do in front of other people, but to try and normalize it so that that shame isn't there. It's just an understanding
It's just
that
private.
it's just private.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
totally.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks for sharing that and explaining a little bit more about that. Um, are there any kind of resources or anything that you want to point people towards? Or maybe like you're welcome to plug yourself. I
Plug
don't.
myself. I am going to plug myself a little bit. I mean, because, you know, please employ me, but also because my website has really great resources, and I've made resources for parents, for adults, for teens who are looking for resources for themselves, for folks with disabilities. And I do have an LGBTQ resource page, but at the moment it doesn't have any resources on it. It's kind of something that I didn't have time to finish, but I will. I'm getting on it. And so that's a good place to look. It's very Canadian based, but
What's your
the
website
information is
called?
like good.
What's your
Pardon?
website called?
My website is Becomingeducation.ca.
Nice. Becomingeducation.ca. That's
Yeah,
cool.
my business is Becoming Education and Advocacy. And yeah, so that's a really good resource. There's for parents, there's actually I have it over here, I think. Yeah, it's a book called Talk Sex Today, like really amazing. Hold on, sorry. I'm gonna grab it. And it's a Canadian sex educator and another Canadian sex educator. So, oh gosh. Don't worry. So this is Talk Sex Today. And so this is Meg Hickling. She's like the grandmother of sex education in Canada, and she started the first like kids' body science. And so this is broken down by age. It talks about how to talk to kids about sex that are like in kindergarten, and then it goes all up to teenagehood. And it's a super great resource for parents, and honestly any adults who are want to be an askable adult in their kids' lives. And I feel like there's other ones. Ooh. For adults, if you haven't read Come As You Are, I highly recommend Come As You Are. It breaks down how we physiologically and psychologically, how we are sexual beings. It's aimed at cis female sexuality, but it's based on real studies, going back to science, but real studies out of the Kinsey Institute and other sexology institutes, to just talk about like, and honestly, like pull apart our ideas of like what is normal, you know, how often should I be becoming feeling sexual, and just like breaking apart how we get turned on and how that's different than how the media and society expects us to, and how a lot of our ideas around sexuality are coming from this cis male centric framework of you should always be ready for sex all the time, and that you should just, you know, be ready to jump with 2 feet right in, and that if you aren't, that you're somehow broken. And I think, do I have that book around? Yeah, I do. Hold on, I'm gonna just show them all.
Okay. Stephanie's show and tell of the best books to learn about sex, consent, and child development.
Yeah, so then this is Come As You Are, and it's by Emily Nagotsky, and she's a doctor of sexology. Yeah, just like so good, and laid out in a way that each chapter has like a little bit of homework for you to do, and to kind of like bring everything that the chapter has talked about and really individualize it for yourself and understand your own your own way of being. And she just is so great about driving home over and over again, like, that you are normal, and the way that your body works is normal, and the way that you have sex is normal, and that she just wants to just like rip apart all of these ideas. So yeah, highly recommend.
That's really good. I think I'm glad for things like that. And I mean, I'm not a sex educator, but I have done workshops in secondary schools here. And one of the main things that I've said to people that I feel it's, I mean, I go there to talk about gender identity, but I do talk to them about sort of the expectations that society and possibly even our own families have of us, even if they've not explicitly said it. And one of the things that I brought up so often in these workshops, I was like, just in case nobody tells you, if you're never interested in sex, or you're not motivated by sex, or you don't ever really want to have it, like, that's really okay. You don't have to, you know. And I think there's still, even in conversations now that I think are very open, there's still this thing of like, you probably will have sex eventually. And you know, sex will happen to you. And you know, it was something that I just thought it was a rite of passage. I just thought it was something that's going to happen. And it was only when I think I was about 27 that I found out about being demisexual, because so many of my friends and partners would like look at someone and be like, oh, I'd shag them. And I was like, how do you know? You've just
Yeah,
seen
yeah,
them one time. I don't understand. And they're like, well, it's just how I feel. And I was like, what, already?
yeah.
Like, and then eventually I found sort of the word that describes me. Like, it does happen, but only sort of when I'm emotionally intimate with somebody. And
Mhm.
then I'm like, oh yeah, maybe. And then I think about it, but the rest of the time it just doesn't exist for me at all.
Mhm.
And I wonder, do you bring up that kind of thing when talking to people about, like, you don't have to do this, and it's not like, because I think about the fact that you said, when we're younger, we might do these things, just like masturbation and stuff, purely for like a sensory reason. But I
Mhm.
imagine for a lot of people, and maybe even asexual people, that maybe that just continues. Maybe it just never does turn sexual, and maybe it is
Mhm.
for some people only a sensory thing.
Yeah, I think it's super important to be queering the sex ed that I give. And so um, reminding people that asexual and aromantic and demisexual people are valid, and that like having the not I shouldn't even say the absence, like not wanting to have sex or not wanting to be in a relationship, or only wanting to have sex with yourself, are perfectly normal and valid things to be. And that also, like, that there are people that will love you and will want to be with you in the spaces that you have for people to be in.
Mm.
So like, I think that sometimes people are being told this idea that like, oh, if you never want to date, if you only want to have friendships, if you do want to date, but like sex, like, penis and vagina sex or penetrative sex is off the table, or that if you don't want to jump into bed the first time you have a date, for demisexual folks, that like, I want everybody like that to know that there are people out there that want that too, and
Mm.
that like will be that person that you want or not, right? Like, and this kind of goes back to something that I've been trying to teach people about, especially folks in heterosexual society and stuff, that like, we make jokes about how long the LGBTQ plus acronym is, and sometimes people are like, well, why do we need that, and blah blah blah. And it's like, it's for these reasons, right? Is that I've been non-binary my entire life, but I didn't have those words up until about 5 years ago. And that doesn't mean that I'm some sort of um, millennial snowflake who feels like I need to have a label for myself. It literally means that there's finally a word for to identify who I am, and that helps me find community, that helps me define myself for others. It helps me educate others about queer community. And so some folks, even in the queer community, feel somehow threatened by the idea that the acronym keeps expanding. And I just want to encourage those people to recognize that it's actually really healthy, because back in the 80s, even, you could be a butch dyke, you could be a femme lesbian, you could be a femme gay man, you could be like a butch gay man, or you could be transsexual, which is not a word that we use anymore. Transgender is what we say now. But like, those were your categories. You had 5 categories, and like 4 of those were like on the binary of like you know, you're a lesbian or you're gay and that's it. And I think that it's so important that we've come past that, because many of us don't fall in those categories and many of us don't want to ID that way. And I'm sure that even back then that there were lots and lots of people who took on those identities because they were the only choices and
Yeah.
not because it felt good for them.
Yeah, I agree. And I sometimes wonder, like, about these people who get worried or are frustrated with so many words. I wonder if they imagine that there's like a word farm somewhere. These words are very difficult to farm, and we only get so many a year. And they're like, man, you've just taken up all the rare words that we've harvested. There's not a lot to go around. Like we've got a word shortage. Like you're taking the piss. And I'm like, it's fine. Did you also know, like, have you ever read a dictionary? I fucking haven't. Mostly when I was a kid, I looked at dictionary words that were rude, and I laughed. Well, obviously, like in the context of what we're speaking about, it's not rude. It's totally fine. But you know, like 9-year-old me was like giggling with my mates, look like, huh, penis,
Yeah.
and you know, just being silly children. And but I've never actually read a dictionary back to front, and like those other words existing and me not knowing what they are or what it means. Like I'm still fine, it's all okay. And
Yeah.
like you don't have to know every word. I think people, I don't know if maybe they're a little bit like anxious about putting a foot in it or saying the wrong thing, or they're just kind of, or maybe like they've got good intentions, but the actual hard work that goes into being intersectional is that, you know, they're looking for an end point, aren't they? They're like, oh, surely I've learnt enough by now, this is exhausting. I'm like,
Yeah.
listen, I mean, I hear you, but also like blame the people who've kind of set up this false idea that everything's very simple, everything's very predictable, like it's really limited. You know, you've got, like you were saying, like one of two choices, and yeah, easy. Don't worry, don't think about it anymore. Just follow the script, man. Like it'll be fine. And I sort of understand, because I only came to the kind of trans plus world at the age of 26, and before that, like I had no idea what anyone was talking about. I took the piss out of a trans woman I knew actually a couple of times, um, which obviously like I feel bad about. Well, yeah, I do feel guilty about now, and I'm, you know, have changed my approach to these things, somewhat selfishly, I guess it would be honest to say, because you know this, I've realized this affects me, so now I'm invested. So I kind of don't begrudge people that feeling of like, oh my god, there's so much to learn. I'm like, I know.
Mm-hmm.
But also I think the difference is, if it doesn't affect you, like it's a privilege to be able to put that learning away for a little bit and think about something else.
Mm-hmm.
um I was thinking about this, you know, because of our conversation earlier about like the online space and finding community, because I don't have that option. You know, the world I exist in is very much does not reflect me. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't have the option of putting these things down, not for very long anyway. You know, like you were saying, like some people like non-binary and like trans plus community, we're not happening on a cloud somewhere like as an abstract concept, like literally like we're making a sandwich at lunchtime. You know, some of us like you going to pick the kids up from school or something, we're doing the grocery shopping and, you know, washing our pants, like
Mm-hmm.
just standard sort of everyday average people, and we're everywhere. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's too late, so get
Well,
on
I've
board.
liked those memes of like, have you seen those memes of like the gay agenda? And it's just like, you know, have breakfast, like,
Yeah,
you know, take a shower, you know, do food prep or whatever it is. And it's just like, yeah, that's the gay agenda. Like, be a freaking human being,
yeah.
you know, advocate for our human rights and others' human rights. Like, that's on the list. Be gay is on the list. But like, as far as like what the feminist or the gay agenda is, it's like it's just like everybody else. Like we don't do anything special. Like my house is a disaster. It looks like any other single parent's house. Like I don't know. I don't know what to say. Like what do you think
Just don't
what do
tell
you
them
think
about
we
the
do?
ritual sacrifice.
No, I stopped doing that a long time ago.
There's that meme that always goes around, and it's a picture of wind turbines, and it's something
Oh,
like it's
yeah.
taking the piss out, you know, the one I'm talking about, where there was some really ridiculous, I think it was a US headline saying that people are putting low people are putting some sort of chemical into the wind to make people gay or something, and it had a
Yeah,
picture of
yeah.
these turbines, and everyone was taking the piss, like, you know, people were putting something in the wind to try and make everyone homosexual, and someone was like, oh my god, who told? And the last person went, I bet it was Dave. And everyone's
Yeah.
like, oh, for God's sake, Dave.
Totally. Yeah, because there's a rainbow. It's like all the wind turbines, and then there's like a rainbow that's
Yes,
being cast. Yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean,
I think if I had an agenda, it would be, is it bedtime yet? That's pretty much mine.
oh my
Or what,
God, sleep. I
or
love
what's for
sleep.
breakfast. I literally, when I go to bed, I think about breakfast. I think if rights wasn't so important and necessary, if someone was like, what's your purpose in life? I'd be like, probably breakfast.
Maybe you're actually a hobbit and
I'm a
not
hobbit in a giant's body.
you're like first breakfast, second breakfast.
Oh my god, a
Yeah.
non-binary hobbit could be a nobbit. That's funny.
Oh my God. Okay, I went to go visit a couple of genderqueer friends. Actually, you should listen. My friend Axel, and I, um, we're gonna be doing we a radio show in our area. We have a cooperative radio, so it's run all by volunteers. And so Axel and I are gonna be doing this show called Query. It's gonna be like two times a month we'll be doing it, but we got together with them and their boyfriend, and we were all hanging out and whatever, and they live on this road called Sproat Road. It's Sproat, Sproat. And I was like, what does that even mean? And then we were joking because it's like a super, like where I live is like super hippie, and so I was like, sounds like a sprouted oat and whatever. And I was like, that's totally some like the new wave of like non-binary kid is gonna be like, my name is Sprout. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, and then we were making jokes about, you know, and I've seen that lots on groups, non-binary groups that I'm on, that it's like, oh look, the gang is here, and it's like, you know, there's Kai and Raven and like all of these like super, I don't know, super
Yeah.
non-binary names. I don't know. I think it's great. I love that we get to name ourselves, and I think it's really important. And but I also like to joke about it because, like, you know, my counselor is trans, and their name is Kai. And then when I was trying to tell somebody else in the queer community about Kai, they were like, which Kai? And then it's like, like, how many Kais do you have? Like, you know.
Yeah, I saw one meme that was saying like trans guys' names are basically, like, a lot of the time they're like sort of like old haunted, like ghost, like Victorian ghost boy names, and
Okay.
then a lot of like non-binary people's names are like inanimate objects or like
Mhm.
parts of nature.
Yeah, totally.
um I saw another meme that's gone around a little bit, of this guy on Twitter. He's like, and he was saying, when you say to a non-binary person, oh, what's your pronouns? And they're like, oh, how did you know that I was non-binary? And he's like, your name is Socks.
Yeah, totally. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're joking about it, but also, I mean, it's okay. Like,
Oh
you
yeah, no.
take whatever name feels good for you and stuff, and that, I don't know, it's just like an in joke, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, it's not a poking fun thing. I love that we have this culture, and I think a massive part of the trans plus culture, and this is something that I think a lot of allies or people who are just not really aware don't necessarily get, is that I think so much of our communication is just ridiculous. Like, it's so funny, like it's so much satire and taking the piss out of each other. I saw one earlier, TW for genitals, from one of my trans women friends on Facebook, and she posted something that says, I wish I had money, but all I have is this giant cock. And I could stop laughing. I was like, that's absolutely genius. I love that. And I mean, obviously there's a serious side to kind of rights and why it's so important. But I do think humor, like, is such a good way to learn and express yourself as well. And I think it's a great way to kind of help people make inroads into the community and like understanding what we're all about, because I think it can be a really heavy subject, especially when we're talking about like reduced quality of life and things like that. And I think it's easier to learn from humor than it can be if somebody's really expressing their story and it's perhaps a bit negative, or contains trauma and stuff. Yeah, I mean, so some of the jokes I have, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my phone and seeing some of these things that are being posted by my trans plus friends, and I'm having a great time, and I want to turn to the person next to me and be like, oh my god, look at this meme, and they're like, do I laugh at that? I'm not really sure what the rules are, or I don't get it. And I'm like, oh. So yeah, I think you need a lot of humor in our community, just as a coping mechanism. But
Yeah.
also I think it's our sort of generations, like our millennial generation, and particularly like Gen Z. Yeah, that's the next one, isn't it? I think a lot of us have grown up in a world that's kind of not quite geared towards our success so much for a lot of people. And so our outlet is this kind of extreme humor sometimes, and particularly stuff that other people may find a bit much. Like, I don't know, I think the shock factor is sometimes it verges on hysteria, but then better out than in. You've got to express
Yeah,
yourself.
I was thinking of better to laugh than cry, because it feels like, yeah, it's a lot. I do think that that we have to like, there's humor, and then we also have to hold space for those people who aren't in that place in their life that it's funny, right? Because that's definitely a part of being in the trans community, is that like there's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of rejection that happens, and that not everybody is comfortable to talk about those sorts of things. And maybe it's where they are at in their journey. Maybe it's they will never be able to joke about those kinds of things, and I know that I was looking at videos on YouTube yesterday about dysphoria. So I was trying to create some dialogue with a business person in town around dysphoria, and it really like drove home for me about how all of us in the trans and non-binary community experience dysphoria differently and in different intensities, and that like some people might be really fine with making jokes about their body, or about the parts of their body that they wish that they could change, or and then there are other people that like that's just like horribly triggering, and then they can't leave the house, and and it makes them feel a lot of pain, and contemplate self-harm and all this kind of stuff. And so it's like I think that those can be funny, but only if sorry, I'm just gonna reject this call. Yeah, I don't know, just that, like, as with all groups of people, that there are those of us who need a lot of support, and those of us who can laugh at ourselves, and then there's like a nice in between, and that all of those feelings are valid. Your lack of dysphoria is valid. Your like intense dysphoria is valid. And that like if you're offended by a meme, that like that's okay too.
Yeah,
But that
sure.
we also have to allow for people to like, as long as it's honestly coming from a trans person, like that joke is okay in the way that it's like it's part of somebody's story.
Yeah, and I think I personally find that in the sort of trans plus circles that I'm in, that we're quite good, I think, at the whole boundary thing and autonomy thing, because if someone wants to kind of make a joke about themselves, it's very clear that they're expressing themselves, but you would never send that to somebody else or apply it to somebody else.
Right.
And that you take that as that individual expressing themselves, but that's not necessarily how everyone feels. And I think it's like honoring or keeping in mind that just because that single person is expressing themselves, they don't represent anybody else in that moment. And I definitely recognize that over the years, sort of 6 and a bit years since I realized who I was in terms of my gender identity, I've gone through many phases, and some of them where I felt very raw and very vulnerable, and I just couldn't laugh at anything. Excuse me. And there are even conversations I couldn't witness happening because it was just so triggering. And I've got to a point now where, like yesterday, I read a piece that was written by somebody who's gender critical. And in the past, like that would have been way too painful for me because it would have really triggered my kind of imposter syndrome and believing that nobody cares and all that kind of thing. But now I'm in a place where I'm secure enough that I can read something like that and consider it, and it's not too difficult. So yeah, I really acknowledge that, and I think that, you know, like you said, like every stage is valid. And also I don't think that there's this end. I think sometimes we as a community are really pressured into this end point where we're fine with everything. We've made peace with the fact that things are shit for us, like honestly speaking, and that we should arrive at some point at this place where we just get on, we don't cause a scene, and we don't stick up for ourselves. We don't make a fuss of it. We just sort of take it and don't stand up for ourselves and kind of get back into being quiet again and compliant. And I'm very careful that we don't. I think that telling people that their feelings are invalid, or that they're being insecure, or that they should take responsibility for their own trauma, and ultimately like dismissing people who are behaving in any way other than in a way that you can have banter with them or they can entertain you. I think that eventually will then lead, it's just silencing us again, isn't it? Because whilst we're all I believe that we're all here to contribute lots of different things in life, regardless of our identity. It's not always about that, and we still need something in return. We're not just here to contribute and to be entertaining or to be a resource for other people. Like, we still have a long way to go, and I think we do have to be really real about that and frame our sort of making fun of things as maybe a coping mechanism, or just a fleeting moment of self-expression, rather than a representation of the whole thing. So yeah, I do think it has to be balanced.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about like owning that this is coming from you, like this is your own experience, because I think that as soon as we start talking on behalf of the community, or on you know, start using these really like big blanket statements about we, and we should do these things and blah blah blah, that that then we disempower so many people who don't have the same lived experience as us. And I also think that speaking on behalf of the community can set us up for, yeah, for like hurting others with our expectations. And I'm just thinking of a very famous trans person who I have fallen out of love with recently, and I called him out on a post, and was like, I really think that you have a bunch of internalized transphobia and that you should probably go to counseling. And that was real, like, he was really upset, and everybody else was really upset, and I was kind of shocked because I didn't even think he was going to reply to me. And I think that that's the danger in speaking on behalf of the community, is that we all have work to do. Like, we should all be, you know, with a good queer counselor who's helping us unpack shit, because like we've all been raised in this like super cis, heteronormative, white supremacist, colonized society. And because of that, we've internalized all of these ideas. And even in our queerness, we have to unlearn them, or else we just, you know, prop up all of those structures and continue to harm people in our own community with them, because we haven't unpacked those things and we haven't looked at them. And yeah, like I think it's really, really fucking problematic. And if you feel like, you know, trans people should be this way, or you know, or we shouldn't be asking for these kinds of rights, or whatever it is that you feel, like, say, I think this, right? Like, this is how I feel. It goes back to I messages, right? And like owning your feelings. Shoulds are bullshit. And you know, like, everybody has a different life than you. Everybody's had different experiences, and to try and say that everybody should do what you've done in your life and everything will be fine or whatever is just like so incredibly egocentric. To like, do you honestly believe that everybody had the life that you've lived? Like, that's just bananas. Sounds like something like a middle-class white cis het man would say. Like, isn't everybody just fine? You're like, no. No, we're not. Yeah.
Yes, I agree, and it's something that in season 1 I interviewed Juno Roche, who's a trans author, and one of the things they said is that in your activism you have to deprioritize yourself as much as possible in order to like fairly represent your community, or you know, your activism and right stuff. And yeah, I think that's a really, really important part of like representing others, is that you're aware of how many variations there are, and that you are one of maybe a million who feel kind of quite like you do. Excuse me. And I think that has to come through in so much, and I think that that's something that queer people can do really well, because we've examined ourselves, not just our gender identity, but as a kind of result of that coming up, we've often examined so many other things, and we have realized just how nuanced our experiences are. And I think that if you meet the kind of social standard enough, then you've possibly never asked one of those big questions of yourself, and then as a result you've never asked or never became aware of all of those other nuances. So I do think that we potentially have a really good point of view in being able to examine all of those things about ourselves, and having the courage to answer those questions and be honest and say, like, I don't know, or maybe this particular experience of mine is not particularly common, or we've kind of made peace with the fact we're not going to fit these standard things. And I really hope that we continue to have a lot more sort of expanding and opening of minds in our community, so that we can all come together with some kind of basic consensus, because until there's like all these whilst there's all these arguments over the kind of nuances and the small things, then we're not going to be taken seriously by, I think, people who are holding a lot of the power, and who are like, well, if you can't agree on what you want, then what, come back when you do. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I've just realized how long we've been talking for.
Probably a while. Hey, how long have we been talking?
So it is
2 hours.
Yeah, nearly 2 hours. So I mean, we've got plenty of material. It might not all make it, I'll be honest.
Oh no, I wouldn't expect. I remember your stuff is like around 90 minutes. It's probably like max. Hey, yeah.
Yeah. So
well, that's good, because I think that we kind of like meandered through things, so I'm sure you could listen to it and then be like, we're just gonna cut that out.
Yeah. No, it'll be good. It'll be good. So Stephanie, thank you for joining me on the Transection podcast. Just one more time for people who are looking for help with sex education, gender education, remind us what your website is again.
Yes, so I am Becoming Education and Advocacy, and you can find me at www.becomingeducation.ca, because I am Canadian.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Good job. All right, thank you very much. And listeners, remember, if you want any free resources on anything sex and gender education related, you can find them on Stephanie's website. And Stephanie's still working on that, so there'll be even more good things to come. So go and have a look.
Yes, and lots of online offerings coming up in the next couple of months as well. So workshops, online workshops and things.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Transection podcast. I've been your host, Harris Hill. And if you haven't followed us on social media, we're on Facebook, the Transection Podcast, Instagram at Transection Podcast, and Twitter at TransectionP. It'd be lovely to connect with you there, and you can of course message us and tell us things, or if you've got any questions, you can ask me anything if you like, and it doesn't mean I'll answer it if it's a bit cheeky, but I probably would anyway, just for a laugh. So yeah, anyway, I will see you on the next episode, and until then, look after yourselves and try and have fun, even in this really, really weird situation that we're in.